The new 10th edition Warhammer 40k Space Marine Codex is available for pre-order. The embargo date's finally passed, so I can talk about it. It's going to be 2 weeks though. I think it's a 2-week period for pre-orders before it comes out on the 14th. Anyway, I've got my hands on it, thanks to Games Workshop for sending it through, so I can give you my thoughts and feedback. Now, there's a lot of things I could talk about with this codex because there's been a lot of changes. We've gone from HQ, troops, elites, fast, heavy to the rule of 3, and we've got rid of the librarian powers and the litanies from the chaplains, and there's a lot of changes in this book. There's a lot of things I could talk about, and well, where to begin? So I thought to myself, what would I want to know if I was listening at home? And what I'd want to know is the detachments. So I'm going to go through each of the new detachments that you can bring. We already had the Gladius Strike Force, the one with the Assault Devastator Tactical Doctrine. Not going to touch on that. So I'm going to go through each of the new detachments rather than delve into my thoughts and feelings on the book. There'll be a video on that later in the week where I've sat down with Sultan from Sultan Players YouTube channel and we've had a good chat about it now. So let's have a look at the main detachments. Oh, but before we do, for those that don't know, Oath of Moment has changed. Previously, you would point at a unit in your command phase and say, that one, and your whole army got to re-roll hits and wounds against that in shooting and melee. So they've changed it so it is only re-roll all hits against it, not re-roll all wounds against it. It's still pretty powerful, but it's not Oath of Broken anymore. Now it's more of a normal Oath of Moment. So yeah, point at a unit, I can re-roll all hits against that unit. That's nice. That's a change. I think we needed to see it. Anyway, there's 7 detachments in this book. 6 new ones apart from the Gladius Strike Force. Any chapter can bring them. One is leaning towards Imperial Fists. One is leaning towards Raven Guard. One is leaning towards each chapter. But it doesn't matter whether you're Blood Angels, Space Wolves, a Raven Guard, whether your Marines are green, whether they're grey, whether they're black. It doesn't matter what colour of Space Marines you have. You can choose to assemble your Space Marines following one of these detachments. The detachments represent a certain method of war that your Space Marine faction has chosen. So your Space Marine faction might be Raven Guard-y and might want to use that detachment rule, but for a particular game on a particular thing, your captain goes, no, we're not going to do the Raven Guard-y, we're going to do the ANVIL Siege Force instead. We're going to assemble ourselves together in this detachment, and our method of war is going to be this way for this particular battle. It's open, you can do what you want. So having said that, the first one, ANVIL Siege Force, has got a picture of Imperial Fists on the top and leans heavily into the Imperial Fists way of war. ANVIL Siege Force. All weapons equipped by models from your army have the heavy ability. That means if you stay still, you get +1 to hit. If such a weapon in your army already has the heavy ability and they stayed still, then you get add 1 to the wound roll. +1 to hit is nice. Hitting on 2s for your whole army if you stay stationary, that's nice. It's not as beef as you think it might be, particularly when you're pointing at an Oath of Moment target and you're re-rolling all hits against it. However, +1 to wound with heavy stuff is quite a powerful tool. So if you're thinking of running an ANVIL Siege Force, what you're probably going to do with your army is have 1,000 points of big heavy shooting stuff in the backfields, Brutalis Dreadnoughts, or other things with the heavy keyword like repulsors with the big laser gun on top. You're going to have some heavy weapons in the backfield that you'll move around in the first turn to open up some good firing lanes with, and then not move them again. So for the rest of the battle, they should be hitting on 2s and having +1 to wound when they hit something on 2s. That's the idea behind the ANVIL Siege Force, but you don't want to stay stationary for the whole game because movement wins you games. You need to get onto objectives. You need to engage on all fronts. You need to spread out and move block. You need to take control of the battle grid by being in the battle grid, not just in your deployment zone. If you're playing a fun game at home where you're not using the Leviathan mission deck, where you're just lining up against each other and you're just shooting each other across the table, then the ANVIL Siege Force will feel pretty broken. But you shouldn't be doing that in in games of Warhammer 40k. And if you are doing that in games of Warhammer 40k where you're just staying there and shooting at each other, then you should have also set up lots of large line of sight blocking terrain on the table, some ruins on the table, things like that. Warhammer 40k is not supposed to be played as a game where you're just shooting each other across the table, where you're throwing bowling balls across this open bowling lane right in front of you. It should be a game where you're moving a vehicle around, getting out of the vehicle, where you're trapping on one side, where you're move blocking on another. It should be much more dynamic than just standing still and shooting at you. And at first glance, the ANVIL Siege Force really helps people who stand still or shoot at each other. But to really make this force work, to really make this detachment work, you should be doing that with a couple of your units, half of your units, while the other ones are doing the heavy lifting and actually scoring you the points. As for stratagems, well, Armour of Contempt, the stratagem that everyone knows, which is until the end of the phase, each time an attack targets your unit, worsen the armor penetration characteristic of that attack by 1. Armour of Contempt is in all of these detachments, in the ANVIL Siege Strike Force and the Gladius Strike Force, in all the other ones in here. We know that one, and that one's available to all detachments. The other stratagems for the ANVIL Siege Strike Force are built around holding on to objectives and shooting, as they should be. There's two CP stratagems in here. One is no threat too great, and whenever you target a monster or vehicle, you can re-roll wounds against that vehicle in the shooting phase. So it goes back to basically the old Oath of Moment sort of mechanic. Typically you'll be pointing at your Oath of Moment target, so you'll be re-rolling all hits against it, and then one unit from your army can re-roll all wounds against it. That's no threat too great, 2 CP. And another one for 2 CP is Hail of Vengeance. You shot me, you killed at least a model in that unit, then my unit that you just shot at can shoot back at you. It has to be back at the unit that just shot your unit. So all the stratagems in the ANVIL Siege Strike Force around shooting, holding on to objectives. There's one which allows you to fall back at the end of the fight phase, so long as it's within range of an objective marker or back into your deployment zone, which is nice. It means that you're not tied up. Basically, the ANVIL Siege Force is built with Imperial Fist players in mind. The Iron Storm Spearhead is the next attachment, and it's built with Iron Hands in mind. Once per phase, each unit from your army can re-roll 1 hit, 1 wound, or 1 damage rolled made for a model in that unit. Basically, the way to think about this one is free CP rerolls for days. Every time your army attacks, every time a unit in your army attacks another unit, you're re-rolling a hit or a wound or a damage roll, and you're doing that in the fight phase, you're doing that in the shooting phase, you're pouring on the hate. I like the fact that you're also allowed to re-roll a damage roll as well, because there are some powerful weapons that the Space Marines have access to. Re-rolling a las cannon damage result, or re-rolling a melter spear damage result. It could be pretty pokey. And the Iron Storm Spearhead, as I said, is built with Iron Hands in mind. For example, one of the enhancements is called The Flesh is Weak. That's Iron Hands 101. And it gives an Adeptus Astartes model a Feel No Pain of 4+, which is strong. And the stratagems have Iron Hands in mind as well. For example, for 1 CP, Unbowed Conviction. When an Astartes unit from your army is below its starting strength until the end of the turn, you can ignore any or all modifiers to its characteristics and or to any roll or test made for it, excluding modifiers to saving throws, and that's 1 CP. There's Vengeful Animus. You don't have to roll to see if something blows up for deadly demise. It automatically deadly demises. There's Ancient Fury for 1 CP, and this is for Dreadnoughts, and this is very epic. Adeptus Astartes Walker models, so Dreadnoughts, until the start of your next command phase, you improve your model's move, toughness, save, and leadership, and OC control by 1. Most Dreadnoughts have a 2-up save. So if they're getting hit by AP -1 stuff and you've improved the save by 1, that AP -1 stuff, you're still getting your 2-up save. If you put Ancient Fury on your Dreadnought and Armour of Contempt on your Dreadnought, then AP -2 stuff hitting your Dreadnought is still AP dash. You're still getting your 2-up save, and putting the toughness up as well. It's nice. And each time that model makes an attack, You add one to the hit roll as well, so it tends to be punching things on 2s or shooting things on 2s. I like Ancient Fury. If you've got any dreadnoughts and you're playing Iron Hands, that'll be your go-to stratagem and you'll be playing it all the time. They've also got a shoot back stratagem as well called Power of the Machine Spirit. Love this name. Power of the Machine Spirit. A vehicle that gets targeted that was reduced below half strength, that vehicle can shoot back at the thing that reduced it below half strength. Power of the Machine Spirit. It's lovely. After the Ironstorm Spearhead, we're moving on to your salamander flavoured looking Marines, the green guys, the Firestorm Assault Force. Ranged weapons equipped by Astartes models in your army have the assault ability. So in the Gladius Strike Force, if you pop the Devastator Doctrine, it gives your weapons the assault ability. Essentially, you have Devastator turned on all the time. Your entire army can always advance and shoot all the time. It just adds the assault rule on top of the ranged weapons that you have. Suddenly, the Firestorm Assault Force is a very mobile, very shooty army. That's the main key to take out the Firestorm Assault Force. Its mobility and its shootiness, the ability to move around and get the angles it needs to throw down the fire. Each time an attack is made with such a weapon to a unit within 12, it adds 1 to the strength characteristic of that attack as well. So as well as having the assault ability on all your shooty weapons within 12, plus 1 strength, this isn't as impactful as just being able to move, advance and shoot all the time. Yes, it'll really help your melters, which are typically strength 9, go to strength 10. It will also help with some flamers at close range, those torrent weapons that are only 12-inch range. It's going to help a bit, but perhaps not as much as having Devastator turned on all the time. By no means am I saying plus 1 strength within 12-inch range is bad. It's not bad. It's going to come in clutch, but it's not going to come in clutch as much as being able to suddenly advance 12 inches around the side of that roo and then suddenly I can see you. That's going to come in more clutcherer. Yes. The key stratagem that they have for 1 CP is called Crucible of Battle, and you can use it in your shooting or the fight phase, which is nice because until the end of that phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack that targets the closest eligible target within 6 inches, add 1 to the wound roll. So you're looking for 1 CP in the fight phase plus 1 to wound, which is pretty beef. It's good for dreadnoughts, it's good in close combat with your just standard infantry, it's good for terminators. Plus 1 to wound is pretty beef. And also plus 1 to wound if you're shooting at something within 6 inches is pretty beef. There's also immolation protocols for 2 CP. Until the end of the phase, torrent weapons by models in your army have devastating wounds. That's when you're shooting flamers in your shooting phase, giving them devastating wounds. A full unit of 10 Infernus Marines or a full unit of aggressors with Flamestorm. This is 2 CP, but it will be very nasty. Such as the last stratagem I want to talk about, which is literally called Burning Vengeance. And it happens in your opponent's shooting phase after your enemy resolves an attack against an Astartes transport. The unit inside the transport can jump out and then shoot back at the unit that shot your transport. Don't know how often that will come up, but I like it. It's juicy. Or maybe you've moved a transport round onto an objective, but you didn't want to get the guys out yet because you knew if you got them out onto that objective or on that point on the battlefield that they'd just get lit up and half of them would get removed. So you kept them inside. And then when that vehicle gets hit by some attacks, the vehicle takes a chunk of the brunt, a chunk of the firepower. Then you get your guys out to return fire. There's going to be occasions where you want to do it that way instead. Half keeping the guys safe, half trying to bait the shots into the transport instead. I mean, you can do it with Razorbacks now because Razorbacks have a function again. Remember when the edition came out, what could actually go in a Razorback? Tactical Marines couldn't go in Razorbacks anymore because Tactical Marines came in 10-man squads. Well, Tactical Marines now have a new rule called Combat Squad, which is the same as the old rule, which means tactical marine squad can combat squad into 2 5-man squads during the battle formation setup part of the game, basically right at the start before you put any miniatures down. So you can bring a couple of Razorbacks along now and put 5 in one Razorback, 5 in another Razorback. I'm glad we can do that again. It was a sad 3 months when we couldn't, but we can. Next, Storm Lance Task Force. Storm Lance Task Force. This has got White Scars in mind. Starters units from your army are eligible to declare a charge in the turn which they advanced or fell back. Beautiful. So biker units always advancing and charging, advancing and charging, advancing and charging. Or if they get locked in combat, they can fall back and charge. If you're falling back, it doesn't mean you can shoot, but it does mean you can charge again. And yes, it's got bikers in mind, but it'll also really benefit White Scars armies or armies that have high assault. You don't necessarily have to bring bikes to make this one sing. Say your army's got a lot of Terminators in it, or Blade Guard veterans in it, or Assault Intercessors in it, or Assault Intercessors with jump packs in it. You might have an assault-based force that you want to advance and charge with. So 1,000 points or 1,500 points of your army is pushing forward, is delivering the pain, and being able to advance and charge with half of your army or 3/4 of your army is going to be very strong. And then once they get into assault, or if they get assaulted by the enemy and tied up for a bit, the ability to just fall back and charge back in, which gives you that fight first bonus, is quite strong. It's probably going to be stronger with your Blade Guard veterans and with your Terminators and with your Dreadnoughts as well, for example, advancing and charging or falling back and charging. It's going to be stronger with those units than it actually is going to be with Outriders and ATVs, and because Outriders are nice, but old Marine bikers, they could take power fists. It was a chocolate box unit. You could make them quite punchy, or you could make them quite shooty, but Outriders, well, they've just got chainswords. They're not as punchy as you thought they might be. And in this book, yes, there's a chaplain on a bike or a chaplain on an Outrider, but there isn't a captain on a bike in this book. I expect to see that in Codex 11, in 11th edition, maybe, attaching to units of Outriders. So yeah, it's going to be stronger in... It's not that it's not strong, it's just that Outriders and ATVs and things like that aren't designed to be completely killy in close combat. Outriders are good at killing hordes, Outriders are good at killing guard, Outriders are good at killing Tau in close combat, but who isn't? It's going to be stronger on the stuff that is designed to kill anything in close combat, your first company stuff. Of course, there's a strat in here for 1 CP, that allows you to give weapons the assault ability. So you can advance and charge with the Storm Lance Task Force. For 1 CP, that unit that's advancing, that Dreadnought there that's just ran forward, I'm going to give it the assault ability as well. And if the unit that you give this CP to, Blitzing Fusilier 2, has already got the assault rule, if the weapons already have the assault rule, like Space Marines, for example, the Space Marine Bolters have assault and heavy, and they come charging forward, they've already got assault. Well, if you spend 1 CP on a stratagem that's on a unit that already has the assault ability, then that weapon has the Sustained Hits 1 ability as well, so 6s explode. Shock Assault is another powerful stratagem. For 1 CP in your charge phase, you can reroll charges. And melee weapons equipped by models in your unit have the Lance ability. Or Ride Hard, Ride Fast. For 1 CP, you can only put it on mounted units, so that's your bikers, or flying vehicles. That can be skimmers as well as the aircraft. But for 1 CP on mounted units or flying vehicles, each time an enemy targets that unit, because it's riding hard and riding fast, they've got to have -1 to hit and -1 to wound. I like that one. The mounted unit or flying unit doesn't have to advance to get this. It can just be moving around, and it lasts until the end of the phase. Each time any other unit shoots at that unit, it's going to be -1 to hit and -1 to wound. It allows you to reposition from left to right quite quickly, or allows you to move up the board with a threat unit that you want your opponent to pour firepower into it, and then for 1 CP, make it harder for them to hit and to wound that unit. Wind Swift Evasion is also quite nice for 1 CP. When an enemy unit comes within 9 inches of one of your units, you can make a normal move of up to 6. Obviously, you can't put that on one of your units that's in engagement range, but yeah, your opponent comes round, gets within 7 or 8 inches, ready to charge that unit, and it's any unit from your army. It's not a biker unit, it's just one Astartes unit from your army that's within 9 inches of an enemy, and they've come round, and they're clearly that unit of 10 Khorne berserkers are going to go flashing into your unit over there. Well, you can make a normal move up to 6. You can pull back, you can pull left, you can pull right. If you're feeling brave, walk forward. Walk forward 6 inches and move block them and let them hit you, and they get tied up in combat, and then they can't tag that objective down in the backfield, or they can't get engaged on all fronts, or they can't get behind enemy lines, or they can't get one of those secondaries. Any CP, any stratagem that gives you free movement or extra movement in a game is a very powerful stratagem, because movement wins you games. Another way you might think of using it is an enemy unit comes round, they're 7, 8, 9 inches away from your unit, and you're like, okay, I'm going to move my unit now 6 inches forward straight up to them, because I know they're not going to charge me, because this unit is a unit of Terminators, or it's a Dreadnought, or something really chonky, but I'm going to move it forward straight up to them. And this gets me 6 inches further up the table and close to that objective. So now I'm OCing them off that objective. If they had extend battle lines or secure no man's land or one of those secondaries, suddenly you've shut that down. You've stopped them getting that secondary, or you've stopped them getting a primary because you've moved a unit forward onto an objective. It makes a normal move of up to 6 inches. It says any direction, it's fine. Just any normal move. Wind Swift Evasion. I like it. So as we're beginning to see, a lot of the stratagems, a lot of the enhancements for each of these detachments are designed with a particular flavor in mind, a particular chapter in mind. The next one is the Vanguard Spearhead, which is designed with Raven Guard in mind. So each time a ranged attack targets a unit from your army, unless the attacking model is within 12, -1 to hit, and the target has the benefit of cover. It's basically the smokescreen stratagem from the main rulebook for free for your whole army, so long as your whole army is more than 12 inches away from your opponent. Double that up along with the Armor of Contempt stratagem as well. It's going to add a lot of resilience at range to your army. Even though initially this seems very strong, it's perhaps one of the, in my opinion, one of the least strong detachments. So your whole army's got -1 to hit and cover more than 12 inches away all the time. Great. But, as I said before, you need to get forward. You need to get an assault. You need to get onto some objectives. So the stuff in your backfield and the stuff in your deployment zone, particularly in turn 1 and most of turn 2, you're definitely going to feel this detachment rule come into effect quite a lot. And maybe in turn 4 and 5 as well, with the 2 or 3 units that are on the edges, you'll feel it come into effect there as well. So absolutely no doubt that this will come in clutch, and this will save whole units, and you'll feel it at the beginning in particular, you'll feel it at the end in particular, but in the mid game, in the meat and potatoes of the battle where you're slugging it out, how much of your army is going to be within 12, how much, and as soon as you get within the 12, this detachment rule ends. What I'm saying is it's a detachment special rule that your opponent can turn off. Another way it could turn it off is the opponent just rushes at you as quickly as they can to try and stop you getting this detachment rule. It will stop it from the unit that is within 12 of you, but units further back in their deployment zone shooting at that unit, if the attacking model isn't within 12, your unit will still get the -1 to hit and +1 armor save. It's going to be a tricksy one to make this one sing, particularly as you want to get to objectives. You'll want to get in close combat with some units. You'll want to move block with some units. You'll have to learn how to trade out things effectively to make this one sing. But it is very Raven Guardy. It is very stealthy. I like it. And as you can imagine, a lot of the stratagems lean that way in mind. So for 1 CP, Strike from the Shadows. Strike from the Shadows has to be put on an infantry unit from your army that's not been selected to shoot yet. And when that infantry unit shoots at an enemy unit more than 12 inches away, their ballistic skill and AP goes up by 1. This will be particularly powerful on units of Eliminators, Hell Blasters or Devastators. Calculated Feint is another nice one for 1 CP. When your opponent declares a charge against an infantry unit, they can make a normal unit of up to D6 inches or a flat 6 inches if they're a Phobos or Scout squad. And it doesn't say what direction you have to move in. So your opponent moves around, I want to charge that unit. No, 1 minute, 1 CP, I'm moving D6 inches or 6 inches away. It's a bit of a gotcha moment. Don't like gotcha stratagems, but it's here and this is one of the ones you can do. For more shenanigans, Guerrilla Tactics costs 1 CP, and at the end of your opponent's fight phase, you can remove up to 2 Phobos and or Scout Squad units or 1 standard infantry Astartes unit from the battlefield. Put them into strategic reserve. That's Guerrilla Tactics. More shenanigans are available in the enhancements. So the Blade Driven Deep. You pick an infantry model from your army, and while the bearer is leading a unit, models in that unit have the Infiltrator's ability. So a captain in Terminator armor is infantry. You could infiltrate that unit up the table, or a unit of Hell Blasters or something like that. You can basically pick one of your HQs that's stuck with a unit, and with a Blade Driven Deep, you can gain Infiltrate. Or the Ghost Weave Cloak. You pick an Astartes character, and the bearer has Stealth and Lone Operative. Yes, the Raven Guardy Vanguard Spearhead feels very Raven Guardy. The last one here is the First Company Task Force, and as you can imagine, it's designed around First Company, Stern Guard squads, Terminator squads, things like that. Once per battle in your command phase, you can use this ability. If you do, until the start of your next command phase, each time a model from your army with the Oath of Moment ability makes an attack that targets your Oath of Moment target, you can re-roll the wound rolls as well. So this is old school Oath of Moment. Oath of Moment used to be re-roll hits and wounds. Now it's just re-roll hits, and this is now re-roll hits and wounds once per battle in the command phase until the start of your next command phase. So typically in turn 1, maybe in turn 2, you'll point at a unit and you'll have the old school Oath of Moment, re-roll all hits, re-roll all wounds. Oath of Broken is back, but for 1 turn. And then there's 3 stratagems in here that affect only Terminators, Blade Guard Veterans, Stern Guard Veterans, and Vanguard Veteran squads. Or 4. There's 4 in here. The first one, Heroes of the Chapter. You pick one of those units in the shooting or fight phase, they get +1 to hit. If they're below half strength, they get +1 to wound as well. One is in your fight phase and forces the enemy to take battle shock tests. One is in your movement phase called Duty and Honor. It gives you sticky objectives. And then Legendary Fortitude. We'll see this one a lot for First Company Task Force users. So for Terminators, Blade Guard Veterans, Stern Guard Veterans, Vanguard Veterans, let's face it, people are going to be bringing lots of Terminators and Blade Guard with this. But you can use it in your opponent's charge phase just after an enemy unit ends a charge. And then until the end of the turn, each time an attack is allocated to a model in your unit, -1 to the damage of that attack. Basically, for 1 CP in the fight phase, you can give Space Marines First Company Disgustingly Resilient -1 damage, which is a bit annoying being a Death Guard player, because in the Death Guard one, it's 2 CP for the same thing in the fight phase for -1 damage. So the First Company Task Force are more disgustingly resilient than the Disgustingly Resilient Army, which is Death Guard. 1 CP, -1 damage after they charge you until the end of the turn. So if you get charged by multiple units, you're -1 damage versus that unit and -1 damage versus that unit over there. It's going to come in particularly clutch when you're getting smacked by damage 3 weapons into your Terminator unit, which has 3 wounds each, and suddenly you turn those damage 3 weapons into damage 2 weapons. It's also going to be particularly clutch for your Vanguards or your Stern Guard when they're getting hit by damage 2 weapons as well. Legendary Fortitude. For 1 CP, -1 damage, it's huge. It's so huge that they decided to take it away from the Death Guard, that the Death Guard can't have nice things as an army-wide rule, not as just the stratagem Disgustingly Resilient they have now. But it's so huge, that's what they did. But it's back here in the First Company Task Force. Which detachment is going to be the strongest and race to the top of the meta? I have no idea. While the Imperial Fist one, they gives all your guns heavy and +1 to wound. If they've already got heavy, it initially seems like the strongest one. I suspect it'll be the detachments that come down to the movement bonuses, such as the White Scars one, advance, fall back and charge, or the Salamanders one, which means they've got assault all the time and all their weapons all the time. And I say that because movement-based detachment rules allow you to get onto objectives, allow you to get where you need to be. And movement wins your games. I may have said that before. Is the change to Oath of Moment too much? No, I don't think so at all. I think Oath of Moment was a bit too broken, and anyone who went up against it a couple of times definitely felt the power. Essentially, Space Marines before this codex were pointing at one unit a turn and destroying that unit, and it didn't seem to matter how big that unit was, whether it was an Imperial Knight or whether it was a big squad of 20 something with minuses to hit and feel no pain. Essentially, if the Space Marines wanted to delete a unit and they were re-rolling all hits and all wounds against that unit, they were deleting a unit. And at the end of the day, sometimes that didn't feel very fun. It felt fun to do, but not so fun on the opposite side of the table, and I went up against it more often than I actually used it. I think I've used Space Marines like 3 or 4 times in this edition, and I've been up against them 20 times in this edition, 30 times. It certainly felt stronger from the opponent's point of view. So changing it to reroll all hits, I think that feels about right. As for the detachments themselves, there does seem to be enough flavor in here. So a white painted Space Marine army is going to feel different to a black painted Space Marine army. It's going to feel different to a First Company Task Force army. There does seem to be enough variety in the basic detachment rules and the stratagems to make your Space Marines feel different. And I do like the fact, hats off to Games Workshop for this, I do like the fact that all the detachment rules can be fitted are in a paragraph. They're there, they're simple, you can read them in one hit. They're 1 or 2 sentences and I understand, I know what that does. There's not 4 paragraphs here. There's not like, hey, your whole army gets heavy, but if it stays still, it also gets +1 to wound. However, if it's got this thing and it falls back, then it gets this. And then there's none of that. There was a lot of that creeping into 9th edition where it was hard to unpick all the rules sometimes. I like the fact that it does one thing or 2 things and it's simple to read. You can understand it very quickly. Your opponent, more importantly, will understand what your detachment does. What does your detachment does? Oh, well, my detachment does X and Y, and that's it. It's simples. Now, as for the rest of the book and all the individual data sheets, well, you guys remember the size of the index deck for the Space Marines. I'm not going to touch it. There's just too much to go through. I'm sure another creator out there will do some videos on the winners and the losers in the datasheet thing. Many of the datasheets have stayed the same. Many of them haven't stayed the same. Many of the datasheets are missing because this is the first time that I can remember that Games Workshop have removed beforehand they have removed a unit or 2 from codexes as time goes on, but this is the first time that they've wiped out like 10 different units in one hit, which is a sad day for some of us legacy players. And it's also a sad day for people who might be thinking of returning to the hobby after a 10-year break, and they're looking at their Space Marines thinking, well, I'm going to bring my Space Marines along, and they get the book and they look inside and they realize that a third of their Space Marines they can't use anymore. They're refreshing the range. They're changing lots of things, and this is 10th edition, and this is what the codex looks like now. As I said at the start, I've made another video about that where I discuss the codex in greater depth with Sultan Place, who's the biggest Space Marine player on the planet as far as I know. He's got 28 different Space Marines chapters, all painted in different colours that he feels in different ways. So we had a good discussion about the overall feel of the codex, and that will come up in the week at some time, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, or no, 1 minute. The Winter's Wednesdays videos come out for all my channel members, so it won't come out on the Wednesday. Thursday is probably a bit too late, so it'll probably come out on a Tuesday, probably. But anyway, that's my breakdown of the detachments. That's what you can expect to find in the new Space Marines. That's the feel and flavor of the codex. What do you think? What do you think? What's your thoughts, comments, feedback. What do you think about the missing units? What do you think about the new detachments? What do you feel about the flavor of the book? Please write in the comment section below. I do enjoy reading your thoughts, reading your feedback, and hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to support me, then click subscribe, all that sort of shenanigans, or become a channel member. And if you become a tier 3 channel member, you get an extra battle report every single Wednesday as well. Big shout out to all my subscribers and to all my members. Really appreciate you guys. You help keep the lights on, and you're the reason why Games Workshop keeps giving me free stuff, and I'm amazed they're still doing it. So thanks Games Workshop for sending me free stuff as well. Anyway, happy wargaming.